This is just gospel according to Janelle.
Welcome to the Kody Chronicles, where love, faith, and family collide. We uncover the untold stories behind the sister wives' legacy. Every truth has two sides, and we tell both. Before the world knew her as one of the sister wives, Janelle Brown was something altogether different: quiet, intelligent, and strongly independent. She wasn't the kind of woman who sought drama or attention. She was the calm in the storm, the steady presence who believed love could be built through faith and discipline. When Janelle met Kody Brown, she wasn't a wide-eyed romantic. She was practical, grounded, and thoughtful. What drew her in wasn't just Kody's energy or charm, it was his conviction. He spoke with passion about faith, family, and the idea that plural marriage wasn't just a relationship model, but a spiritual calling. It made sense to Janelle. She had grown up around plural families and viewed the lifestyle as something sacred, an opportunity to live a higher law, one centered on sacrifice and community. It wasn't about jealousy or competition. It was about purpose. So when she became the second wife, Janelle entered the marriage with open eyes and a steady heart. She knew it wasn't going to be easy, but she believed deeply that love wasn't just a feeling, it was a choice. During the early years, she and Kody worked well as allies, the real kind of partners who were practical, focused on common goals, and set on building a life for their burgeoning family. If Christine was nurturing and Meri was emotional, Janelle was the planner. She did the budgets, organized logistics, and held the family together behind the scenes. Rarely did she raise her voice. Rarely did she complain. If something needed to be done, Janelle did it. Her faith was her anchor. Even when Kody's energy was pulled in different directions between homes, between wives, between expectations, Janelle stayed steady. She was so deeply invested in the principle of plural marriage that she saw the imbalance as a part of the test. "Love isn't always equal," she once said, "but it can still be fair." For years, that belief kept her going. When the family grew to include Robyn, she watched the dynamic shift again. She noticed Kody's excitement, the way his eyes lit up around his newest wife. But instead of letting jealousy consume her, Janelle turned inward. She focused on her children, on her career, on keeping her faith alive. She told herself that her role wasn't to compete. It was to contribute. To the outside world, she seemed happy, put together, even aloof. Inside, however, cracks were forming. Janelle had always based her faith on structure, the belief that as long as you continued to follow God's plan, things would be okay. The problem was, as the years wore on, that structure started to break down. The rules, the sacrifices, the endless balancing of emotions, it all started to feel less like faith and more like control. Kody's leadership, once inspiring, hardened. His tone changed. His words went from guidance to rules, and Janelle slowly began to realize that the faith she believed in and the version Kody was practicing wasn't the same. He spoke of unity, yet he acted out of pride. He spoke of family and yet built walls. Still, Janelle stayed. Not because she was blind, but because she wanted to believe that what they had built still mattered. She didn't want to see decades of effort reduced to bitterness. She wished to believe that the man she once looked at as a spiritual partner could still lead with love. And perhaps, more than anything, she wanted to prove to herself that her faith hadn't been in vain. So she kept showing up, to family meetings, to filming sessions, to holidays that felt more like obligations than celebrations, all the while smiling through tension, diffusing conflict, and quietly absorbing the weight of everyone else's emotions. Janelle wasn't the wife who yelled or demanded. She was the one who listened, the one who reasoned, the one who kept things steady when everything else was falling apart. But that steadiness had come at a price. She said nothing, but her silence was mistaken for assent. Patience was misconstrued as passivity. And little by little, she began to fade into the background, the reliable one, the strong one, the one who didn't need anything. Except she did. She needed to feel seen, respected, and loved, not just as a wife, but as a woman who had given all of herself. Over time, Janelle found comfort outside of the marriage, not in another person per se, but in her sense of independence. She built a career. She managed finances. She made decisions that reflected her strength, not her subservience. While Kody demanded loyalty in return within his family, Janelle slowly, yet silently, began to claim hers. And yet the faith never really left her. It was complicated, mixing in loyalty, spirituality, and a deep desire to live a good life. But deep inside, something was changing. For years, Janelle had thought obedience was the road to peace. But obedience had led only to silence, and silence had become suffocating. When Christine started speaking out, to question, to challenge, to demand change, Janelle listened intently. Christine's courage planted a seed that Janelle could not avoid. She started asking herself some tough questions. When did my faith stop feeling like faith? When did this family stop being home? When did love become duty? The answers were painful but necessary. And while she didn't say it out loud, a quiet truth began to form in her heart. She was not losing her faith. She was outgrowing it. Janelle's story was never about rebellion. It was about awakening. The woman who once defined herself by belief was starting to define herself by peace. But, as she would soon learn, walking away from the life she had built wouldn't be as loud or dramatic as Christine's. For Janelle, it would be quiet, graceful, a goodbye wrapped in silence, the kind that speaks louder than words ever could. The first real cracks in Janelle's faith didn't appear with anger or betrayal. They showed up quietly in the pauses, the distance, and the exhaustion that crept into her everyday life. For years, Janelle had been the bridge between chaos and order, balancing the family's finances, mediating disputes, and holding back her emotions as everyone else let theirs spill over. When the other wives fought, she reasoned. When Kody grew frustrated, she calmed him. Her strength became her identity and her burden, but the weight of being the steady one began to wear her down. By the time the family moved to Flagstaff, the cohesiveness that once defined the Browns had already dissipated. Each wife had her own space, her own world, her own truth. The oneness that once defined family had become a collection of different lives orbiting Kody. And Kody, well, he was the one who spoke of love and equality, had become unreachable. He would not visit as regularly anymore. His tone had become sharper, more defensive. The man who once commanded loyalty now demanded it. For Janelle, this was the beginning of disillusionment. Her faith was always practical. She did not believe in grand gestures or emotional speeches. She had believed in effort, in teamwork, in quiet work building up to something real. But even that foundation was shaking now. Money was tight, emotions were high, and decisions were being made without discussion. Janelle tried to speak up about finances, about fairness, about respect, but Kody's patience for compromise had run out. The final test came with the pandemic. As the rest of the world struggled with fear and uncertainty, the fragile structure of the Brown family began to break down under pressure. Kody's rules became rigid, demands impossible. He dictated where the children could go, whom they could see, or how they should live. For Janelle, it was too much. The older sons, Garrison and Gabriel, pushed against the rules, angry that their father had finally become so authoritarian. Kody called it loyalty. Janelle called it control. She tried to mediate, but the rift deepened. Her sons wanted freedom. Kody wanted obedience. And she, caught between a father and his children, chose her boys. It cost her that choice. Kody accused her of undermining him, of being disloyal. He said she had chosen the kids over him. But to Janelle, it wasn't a choice at all. Family wasn't about hierarchy, it was about love. For the first time, she started to see Kody not as a spiritual leader, but as a man consumed by ego. The arguments became more frequent, the distance more visible. When she tried reasoning with him, he threw her loyalty right back in her face. When she kept calm, he said she was detached. No matter what she did, it wasn't enough. And through it all, Janelle remained composed. The cameras often showed her sitting quietly, eyes steady, voice even. But behind that calm was a growing sadness, not just for her marriage, but for her faith. The principle of plural marriage had always been about unity, sacrifice, and shared purpose, but now it felt like a prison built upon one man's rules. Janelle had given her life to this belief, raising children in it, defending it publicly, living by it daily. And now she was watching it unravel. Her faith had promised eternal family. What she saw now was division, resentment, and loneliness. Christine had already begun to question it. Meri was fading into the background. Robyn had become Kody's emotional center, and Janelle, once the glue, was standing in the middle of a system that no longer functioned. It wasn't just about marriage anymore. It was about identity. If faith had been her compass, Kody was supposed to be her guide, but his leadership had turned into judgment. His sermons about loyalty now sounded like ultimatums. The man she once saw as her spiritual equal now felt like a stranger. There was a moment that captured it all. During a heated conversation, Janelle turned to Kody and said quietly, "You're not the same person that I married." He didn't argue. He stared back, silent, defensive, as if hearing the truth was more painful than living the lie. For Janelle, that silence spoke volumes. Something sacred had shifted. The man who once inspired her faith now made her question it. The family she once believed was chosen by God now felt fractured beyond repair. But she didn't walk away. Not yet. She still believed in trying, not because she was weak, but because she was strong enough to hope, even when hope hurt. So she stayed. She stayed through family meetings that were awkward, through tense holidays, through moments that seemed more performances than love. She stayed because to leave would be to admit that all that she had built, every sacrifice, every belief, every prayer might have been for nothing. And Janelle just couldn't face that, not yet. Yet deep inside, the quiet transformation had begun. The woman who had once measured faith by obedience was starting to measure it by peace. She was no longer praying for Kody's change. She prayed for the strength to accept what she couldn't fix. And that is where Janelle's silent goodbye began. Not with a fight, not with a speech, but with a single decision made in her heart, to stop waiting for a man to lead her to God. She would find her own way there. When Christine finally walked away, the foundation of the Brown family cracked for good. What had been whispers of discontent had become open fractures. And for Janelle, those fractures revealed truths she could no longer ignore. Christine's leaving sent shockwaves through the family, but to Janelle, it stirred something deeper, something that had lain buried for years. To her, watching her closest friend find the courage to leave wasn't just painful. It was powerful. Christine had always been the emotional one, the wife who wore her heart on her sleeve, who craved affection and warmth. Janelle was different, measured, independent, logical. But as Christine packed her boxes and said her goodbyes, Janelle realized they weren't so different after all. Both had been living in quiet disappointment, each waiting for a change that would never come. The difference was that Christine finally stopped hoping and started living. Janelle admired her for that, even envied her for that. But the envy soon turned into introspection. For decades, Janelle had defined herself by balance, by being reasonable, loyal, and steady. She had been the one who kept her emotions in check while others fell apart. But now, as she watched Kody's world unravel, she began to wonder if all that steadiness had really served her. Because while she was busy being the peacemaker, she had been losing herself. Kody no longer viewed her composure as a strength, but rather as indifference. When he spoke of loyalty, his words were no longer about faith. They were about control. "I'm the head of this family," he said one day, the pitch of his voice rising. "If everyone can't respect that, there's no family." That word, patriarchy, just hung in the air like smoke. For Janelle, it was the breaking point. She joined plural marriage because she believed in partnership, not hierarchy. She believed each wife was equal before God, each woman sacred in her own right. But now Kody was rewriting the rules. He wanted obedience, not unity. He wanted submission disguised as faith. The silence that had been Janelle's shield now served as her weapon. She didn't shout. She didn't argue. She simply stared back, unflinching at him, demanding loyalty she could no longer give. That conversation, quiet on the surface, seismic underneath, marked the beginning of her true goodbye. Over the next few days, the gap between them continued to widen. Kody spent more time with Robyn, wrapped in the illusion of the perfect marriage. Kody blamed the other wives for disloyalty, for lack of faith, for tearing apart what he believed God had built. But Janelle saw the truth. The family hadn't been destroyed by disobedience. It had been destroyed by pride. She has watched her kids struggle with keeping the connection to their dad alive. She watches Garrison and Gabriel lose hope in reconciliation. Kody's bitterness has infected everything. Every holiday, every conversation, every attempt at normalcy. At one family meeting, Kody's frustration boiled over. He accused Janelle of not supporting him, of allowing their kids to disrespect him. "Choose your loyalties," he said. "You can't have it both ways." That was when, after all these years, Janelle finally said what had been bottled up inside her. "I am not taking sides," she said softly. "I am choosing peace." It was the most radical thing she could have said, because in that one sentence, she rejected the whole system that had defined her adult life. She was no longer playing by the rules of plural marriage. She was no longer shrinking herself to fit a doctrine that didn't see her heart. She was done trying to make a man her moral compass. She sat alone that night in her home when the cameras stopped rolling, a place once filled with laughter, chaos, and children. The silence wasn't comforting anymore, but neither was it crushing. It was clarity. She reflected on her life's journey. From a girl who believed in their shared faith, to the woman who came to realize that faith is without meaning or value when not mixed with love. She thought about Christine, her laughter, her courage, and realized that Christine hadn't destroyed the family. She had simply stopped pretending it still existed. Janelle wasn't ready to walk away yet. But for the first time, she stopped pretending too. She stopped pretending Kody was her leader. She stopped pretending their marriage could be repaired. And, most importantly, she stopped pretending her faith still felt like home. Later, when she spoke to Christine, the quiet understanding between the two women was palpable. They didn't talk about theology or marriage. They talked about peace, real peace, the kind that doesn't come from obedience but from freedom. Christine told her, "You deserve to be happy too." Janelle smiled, though not because she believed it even yet, but because she wanted to. Faith had been her anchor once, but it had also been her cage. And though she still clung to parts of it, she no longer believed that submission to a man was part of God's plan for her life. Kody's patriarchy speech, meant to restore his authority, had done the opposite. It revealed just how far he'd drifted from the man she once respected. That was the moment Janelle's faith in him, and in the system, finally broke. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She didn't make a scene. She simply stood up, quietly, and started walking away, not from her convictions, but from the version of them no longer feeling true. The divide wasn't just between husband and wife. It was between illusion and truth, between loyalty and liberation, between faith and peace. And as Janelle stood on that invisible line, she realized that leaving didn't have to mean losing. Sometimes walking away is the purest expression of faith there is. Because real faith isn't about following someone else's rules. It is about finding the courage to follow your own heart. It didn't come with shouting. There was no grand speech, no sudden explosion of anger. Janelle's goodbye came the way she lived her life, quietly, steadily, and with dignity. The breaking point was deceptively ordinary. Another argument that started small and ended differently than any of the others before. It wasn't about love anymore, or even respect. It was about exhaustion. Kody arrived into the conversation already angry, already defensive. The topic, as it often did, revolved around loyalty, about control, about his rules. He accused Janelle of undermining him, of allowing the boys to disobey him. "You've never supported me," he said. "You've never had my back." Janelle sat still, hands folded, face calm. For years, she'd heard these words. For years, she had carried the blame in silence. But this time, something in her shifted. "I have supported you," she said quietly. "I've supported this family, these children, this faith, but I cannot support something that doesn't exist anymore." The room fell silent. Kody blinked, surprised by the tone of her voice. Not angry, not pleading, just final. He tried to fight back, calling her disloyal, accusing her of following Christine's example. But Janelle wasn't Christine. She wasn't walking away in protest. She was walking away in peace. "I'm not leaving because of Christine," she said. "I'm leaving because of me." That was one of those sentences that landed like a confession not of guilt, but of release. All along, love had been a duty to Janelle. To stay was a virtue. To obey was to have faith. Now, though, she saw it all in focus. Her silence had never been about loyalty. It had been about survival. "God didn't give us this," she said softly. "We built it, and we broke it." There was no venom in her voice, no bitterness. Just truth. It was the fact that she had carried for years the burden of everyone else's decisions. The fact that she had been trying to mend something that refused to be mended, and the fact that her faith, once the greatest strength, had been used against her. When Kody stormed out, she didn't chase after him. She didn't cry. She simply sat in the quiet, the air thick with a strange mix of grief and relief. That silence, the one that used to feel so heavy, felt like freedom. When the cameras rolled again later, Janelle spoke with the same calm composure that had defined her for years. "I don't think we're compatible anymore," she said. "I don't think we believe in the same things." It was the most honest thing she'd ever said on camera. There was no hatred, no urge to injure. Just a quiet recognition that love, when starved too long, dies a natural death. And in the days that followed, the separation became a reality. She packed slowly, deliberately, not with anger, but with care. Touching memories, revisiting photos, letting each object remind her of the years she'd spent trying to make something work. Each box wasn't just filled with clothes or keepsakes. It was filled with lessons. The lesson of how silence isn't always peace. The lesson that loyalty without love is just loneliness. And the lesson that, when faith is built on control, it will always crumble. Her children stood by her, strong, protective, and proud. They had watched her sacrifice too much for too long. And while they were sad too, they were also proud of her. For the first time, Janelle wasn't holding the family together. She was holding herself together. When she spoke to Christine again, the two women shared a moment of understanding. Two journeys that began differently, but ended in the same place: freedom. Christine had walked away with fire. Janelle walked away with grace. And both of them found peace. Meri had stayed longer, clinging to hope. Robyn tried to make sense of the pieces. And Kody, still angry, still wounded, refused to see his part in what had happened. But Janelle didn't need his understanding anymore. She had stopped living for validation long ago. It was not a performance of goodbyes for the cameras, the fans, or even for Kody. It was for herself, for the woman who had waited far too long for love that never finally came, for the believer who confused faith with endurance. And when she closed the door on that chapter, there was no ceremony, no final confrontation, just a quiet drive away, the road open ahead of her, the past fading in the rearview mirror, done waiting for things to change, done trying to earn love, done mistaking silence for peace. "I don't regret the life I lived," she said, "but I do believe in moving forward." A return to herself. A return to peace. A return to faith, not the one she was taught, but that she rediscovered for herself. When Janelle finally left, it didn't make headlines like Christine's departure did. There was no big announcement, no dramatic confession. It wasn't the kind of exit that demands attention, and that's what made it so powerful. She just stepped away. For years, her identity had been defined by one word: wife. Wife of Kody, wife within the faith, wife within the construct of something she had believed in as sacred. Once she walked away, she began the quiet work of rediscovery. Who was she when she was not part of them? It was weird at first. The quiet, the lack of sound. So long, she had run each day by solving problems, balancing the books, and maintaining harmony in a family that seldom had any. Now there was silence, utter silence, the sort that compelled you to listen to yourself. And for the first time in decades, Janelle did. She listened to her own needs, her own dreams, her own heart. She began to see how much of herself she had given away in small pieces over the years. Every compromise, every time she bit her tongue, every time she let her voice go unheard, it all added up. It wasn't that she had lost herself, but she had buried herself under the weight of responsibility and faith. Then she started uncovering her own life again. She slowly rebuilt her own space, her own career, and sense of belonging. Now she didn't need anybody's permission to make a choice or justify her independence, and she did not have to shrink herself for anyone's comfort. There was power in that. It wasn't about anger. It wasn't about revenge. It was about freedom. When she later spoke about it, she didn't talk of bitterness. She spoke of gratitude instead. "I learned who I am," she said. "And that's worth everything I gave up." Faith had once been the center of her world, but now it was something different, personal, internal, and deeply her own. She no longer tied her spirituality to a man or a doctrine. Her connection with God was quiet and private, sans rules and expectations. Janelle didn't reject faith. She refined it. She found it in her morning walks, in her laughter with her kids, in the moments of stillness that didn't require anyone else's approval. For her, leaving wasn't losing belief. It was redefining it. And in that redefinition came a peace that had been prayed for, but never actually felt within the confines of that marriage. When the show's later seasons aired, audiences picked up on it. A change in her delivery, her demeanor, her energy. She didn't resemble at all a woman trying to hold something together. She came across as a woman who had finally let go. Her children saw it too, and they saw their mother become lighter, freer, more herself. They saw her smile more often, laugh more fully, and dream again. For them, her strength wasn't in staying. It was in knowing when to leave. Kody would try to frame her departure as defiance, as a rejection of unity, as disloyalty. But that wasn't true. Janelle hadn't left the family. The family had already left her long before she walked away. What she did was reclaim her life, and that's something nobody could take from her. Even Meri, standing on the sidelines, began to see the same light. Christine had left in anger. Janelle left in peace. Both, in their own ways, found liberation. There was a time when the wives were told that obedience was the highest virtue, that patience was holiness, and that suffering was part of salvation. But Janelle learned something different, that peace is sacred too. She learned that faith isn't measured by how long you endure something that hurts. It's measured by how honestly you live once you stop pretending. And it was in the strength of her heart that she finally found the divine. And not in the structure of plural marriage when she no longer pretended. Her story became a quiet lesson, not just for her children or for the viewers who watched her every week, but for anyone who has ever stayed too long in something that no longer feels right. Because leaving doesn't mean you failed. Sometimes it means you've finally learned what love is supposed to feel like. In interviews following her departure, Janelle spoke softly but with conviction. "I don't regret my past," she said. "It made me who I am. But I'm not looking back anymore. I'm looking forward." That's the essence of her silent goodbye. She didn't leave because she stopped believing in love. She left because she started believing in herself. Janelle's story isn't one of rebellion, but rather one of evolution. The woman who once built her faith around family found out that faith actually begins when you finally trust yourself enough to walk away. In the end, she did not lose her faith. She found it afresh, freed from hierarchy, judgment, and fear. Just peace. Just truth. Just Janelle. And maybe that's the real message in her story. Sometimes the most faithful thing you can do is leave the place that's keeping you small. To stop surviving in silence. To start living in light. Because faith isn't supposed to hurt. Love isn't supposed to demand silence. And peace is not supposed to be earned. It's supposed to be natural. As she looked back, she did not see failure. She saw freedom. And that freedom, quiet and powerful, became her true act of faith.